All right, today, and it's kind of sad to me. This is our last lesson in this series, and I hope y'all. I hope somehow this has elevated the Old Testament to you, because some people look at the Old Testament. Yeah, that's just old history and stuff. But the Old Testament is very important to understanding the New Testament, and I hope. And Christ is all through the Old Testament. So we are entering, though, what is known as the Intertestamental period. And we've been following that string. We've been winding that string up. And, And that string's getting pretty big now. And that string started with Seth, and we've been winding it, and it's going to lead us to Jerusalem. So today we're going to end up in Jerusalem. But historically, it's basically 400 years of silence, it's called, followed by a period of silence. As a matter of fact, we're going to sing that in a minute. The reason it's called silence is that there are no scripture. Now there's lots of other writings taking place in this 400 years, mainly from 400 to about 200 BC. There are some writings called the Apocrypha, which we'll talk about, and why we don't believe it. Why we don't believe it as scripture. It's probably pretty good history. So we're going to sing our song one more time. And I know you're singing it in your shower. It worked last week. There it is.
Creation, patriarch, Exodus. Conquest, judges, kingdom, divided kingdom, exile, return, followed by a period of silence. Adam, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Samson, David, Rehoboam, Daniel, Ezra, followed by the Pharisees.
Okay, we're going to talk about the Pharisees too, and this period of silence. Now, when the Old Testament ended, we find Jews under the leadership of the Persian Empire. But they allowed the Jews to go back to their homeland, and even paid to rebuild the temple. That was a good deal, wasn't it? That was through a guy named Cyrus, huh?
You need to be a little bit louder.
Am I not loud enough?
Just a little bit, that's fine.
Okay. I'll kiss the mic here.
Yeah, right.
I'll slide it a little closer. And so the Jews are scattered, and this is called the diaspora. And that's the scattering of the Jews from their homeland all over the Persian Empire. Now, to the west, what's going on in a place called Macedonia is a king named Philip. And Philip was known for two things: education and war. Now Philip has a son, and when he's 16 years old, he's out with the generals learning about war. And Philip's son's name is Alexander, who becomes Alexander the Great. Does anybody remember, if you read your notes, you know, who was Alexander's mentor? Aristotle. Hey, that's a pretty good mentor to have, isn't it? If you couldn't have a mentor back in these days, Plato or Aristotle, Socrates, take your pick. And so Philip dies in 336 BC, just to give you a time period here. And Alexander became king. He was 20 years old, and he started dominating the known world area at this time. Oh, as a matter of fact, that's supposed to be a bust of him. I don't know if that's real or not. But Josephus, you've heard of him, the famous historian, who lived around right after the time of Christ, right around the destruction of the temple. As a matter of fact, he was witness to it. He wrote about the destruction of the temple. Tough writings there. But in his book, Antiquities, here's what he said about Alexander. He said he had already conquered Greece when he set his sights on the Persian Empire under Darius III. He began conquering territory. When he came to Jerusalem, the high priest met him outside the city. The people were all dressed in white, and the priests were dressed in linen, and the high priest was dressed in purple and scarlet. The high priest takes him to the temple and opens up Daniel 8. Alexander sacrificed to Yahweh and treated the Jews very well, and Jerusalem was spared. Daniel 8 talks about Alexander, over 200 years before Alexander. And so I think that impressed him. And just to save time, I'm not going to read the parts of Daniel 8. I'm just going to tell you what it says. First of all, he talks about a two-horned ram. Now, if you remember, Cyrus merged the Medes and the Persians. That's the two-horned ram, the Medes and the Persians. But they got defeated by a one-horned goat. That's Alexander. But then the one-horned goat dies, and four horns grew up in place of the one-horned goat. And what happened was, when Alexander died, his kingdom was split by four of his generals. Now Alexander had gone on to conquer Egypt and Persia, and he ended up all the way into India. But he died in 323 BC in Babylon. I didn't put the quote in. Yeah, I did. Oh, well, you know, I had this all lined up for you, but no, I don't have ADD, no. Here's a quote from Alexander. I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. So that's pretty wise words from Alexander. When you go on down into Daniel a little way, he talks about the rebellion that causes desolation. And he clarifies it. And then in 9:27, Daniel says this, and I'll put it on the screen for you. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7 in the middle of the 7. He will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. And then we see Jesus talking about this abomination that causes desolation in Matthew 24. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, let those who are in Jerusalem flee the mountains, let no one on the housetop go on and take anything out of his house, etc., etc. So this abomination that causes desolation, this is in the future. But there was an abomination that causes desolation that we'll talk about that happened in the past during this intertestamental period. So some say that this abomination that causes desolation was fulfilled in AD 70 when Rome came and destroyed the temple, but that I don't think that's it. I think this is more of a tribulation, the one that Jesus is talking about. I think it's a twofold one. When Daniel talks about it, I think he's talking about one that took place in around 166 BC, and then also taking place in the tribulation period. So here's a split up of the kingdom. Yeah, Jerry.
Abomination of desolation, something to do with the burning of sacrifices on the altar and desecration of the holy part of the temple.
Yeah.
I read something.
The abomination that causes desolation is not a person necessarily, it's a thing.
Yes.
And the first one I'm going to talk about in a minute, where Antiochus Epiphanes set up an altar of Zeus and burned a pig on the altar. And that brought on the Maccabean time. Here are the original split up of Alexander's kingdom. And if you notice the white arrow, that's where Jerusalem was, and so they were under the Ptolemy group. But then the Seleucids overwhelmed the Ptolemy group, and things were pretty good under the Ptolemies for the Jews. As a matter of fact, Alexander had set up this fantastic library in a town in Egypt named after him, Alexandria. And it was a huge library. And the librarian there decided, because they wanted to Hellenize, and in other words, make everything Greek culture. The Hebrew scriptures were not Hellenized, so the librarian sent some message to the high priest in Jerusalem, and he sent 72 scholars to Alexandria to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, because that was pretty much the spoken language of the world. And it's called the Septuagint, or the LXX, which is 70. So apparently they round down because there were 72 scholars. So that was done around 200. Actually, it was an ongoing process. I think the Pentateuch was probably the first done, but then it was done over a number of years. The Septuagint is probably the translation that most of the apostles used, because sometimes you see a quotation by Paul and you say, that's not exactly like my Old Testament, which is the Masoretic text. And it's because he's quoting the Septuagint. And so there may be a little difference in translation there. So this Septuagint was a big deal. All this took place in this intertestamental period. Now, the Seleucids finally took control over Egypt, and when they did, this was around 200 BC, this Antiochus Epiphanes, he was a rascal, I tell you. He was kind of nuts. As a matter of fact, they called him the Mad One. It was a play on word on his names. And he's the one that set up an altar to Zeus in the temple, sacrificed a pig, and cut out the rituals for the Jews, and it didn't go over too well with the Jews. So there was a rebellion that took place in 167, and it went on to 160 BC by the Maccabees. Matter of fact, you could read about the Maccabees in the Apocrypha. And so they cleansed the temple and they lit this candlestick, but they only had oil for one day. But miraculously, the candlestick burned for 8 days. And so the Jews commemorate this to this day with a festival called what? Hanukkah. That's where Hanukkah came from. It wasn't something that God designated in the Old Testament. It was at the result of this Maccabean period in around 166. So the Jews had their independence until Oh, by the way, here's the candlestick burning.
Menorah.
Yeah. And I thought I had a picture of him. Maybe I do. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out my slides here. See, I do my slides, and if I do it 2 hours before the class, I forget what I did. Old age is
You don't do it.
a terrible thing to waste, I tell you. So, we're coming to, in 63 BC, though, guess who conquered Jerusalem? Rome. The Romans, a guy named Pompey. He conquered the city. Now, this is called, as I told you last week, this period is also called the Second Temple period, because the Second Temple was built, I think 516 was completed, but the Second Temple period, some people started differently. Some started at 538. It goes on to AD 70. And I'm trying to say things right. I learned something in this series. When you talk about BC, you're say like 100 BC, you put the BC after the number. When you talk about AD, you put AD in front of the number. And I didn't know that for a long time, so I'm trying to do that, and I haven't always done that in my notes. But AD 70 is when the temple was destroyed, so that ended the Second Temple period. And so there are three groups that form in this period of time. The first group is called the Sadducees, and they were the rich folks, the ruling class, they call themselves, and they liked the Greek culture, and they wanted to get things over into the Greek culture. They believed in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, but they did not believe in life after death. Isn't that weird? I don't know what they thought happened to you. You just disappear. So they formed around 150 BC. Now here's the thing about it. The only thing we know about the Sadducees was written by people that didn't like them. So, sometimes you can get a kind of a mixed thing there. The next group were the Pharisees, followed by the Pharisees. That's where our little song goes. And the Pharisees formed in this group, and they were from the regular people. But they were going to obey the law meticulously, to the point of being ridiculous sometimes. They even invented a bunch of extra laws. You've heard some of those laws, I think 613 different laws. And it was probably hard to keep up with. The ones about the Sabbath are just ridiculous. But it was them being very meticulous of trying to obey the law. It was almost like scholars in the Middle Ages trying to figure out how many angels could dance on the head of a pin.
But weren't they liberal compared to the Sadducees?
No, that's not them.
That's not them. Okay.
And by the way, we know that angels don't dance on the head of a pin because angels are Baptist.
That's not too big.
Yeah. But now, so they were very meticulous. They started out with a noble cause, trying to follow the scripture, but they got ridiculous. And man does this, and so they get all engrossed in legalism. But there was a third group. The Bible doesn't talk about this group. Some think John the Baptist was associated with this group, and that's the Essenes. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, it is believed, is the result of the Essenes' work. Now, the Essenes thought that the Pharisees were a bunch of liberals.
Oh, the Essenes, okay.
If you can believe how instructive the Pharisees are, and I'll tell this story, it's not too close to lunch. The Essenes believed that Jerusalem was considered the camp, and you're not supposed to go potty in the camp. But also, to go outside the camp was too far to walk. So the Sabbath day was a miserable day for the Essenes. And I'm glad I wasn't an Essene. I don't know about y'all. But it's believed that John the Baptist may have been associated with these Essenes. They were in the Qumran area, and they went out. The Rome kind of destroyed them in AD 70 also. And so that was three groups that were taking place. Oh, by the way, here's Pompey taking Jerusalem in 63. I got the slide in the wrong place. I do that sometimes. Now, what about this Apocrypha? See, there were a lot of writings, but they weren't all canonized. There's a difference. And so here's the reason. The Catholics accept the Apocrypha, and the Orthodox Church accepts the Apocrypha. And some of the Protestants will include it as extra writings, but not necessarily as canon. I think Luther had it in his Bible that he translated to German. But here are the reasons. I'll give you 5 reasons why the Apocrypha was rejected by the Protestants as being Scripture. First of all, no clear New Testament quotes by Jesus or the authors. And the next one is it was not accepted as Scripture by the Jews. That's a very good reason. It was rejected by many Catholics, but until 1546, I think that was the Council of Trent, where they declared that it was as good as Scripture. Some say it contains some false teaching. I think the teaching, this is where the Catholics get their purgatory teaching from, I think, from the Apocrypha. And there are no prophecies or messianic verses in the Apocrypha. It's probably good reading, some good history there, but it's not Scripture, according to the Protestants. Now, we're coming to this age. God is at just the right time. It's going to be time for Messiah. And here's a verse in Galatians, which I love. It says, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law, that he might receive adoption to sonship." So the time was just right. Now I'm going to give you 7 things that show you that the time was right. The first one is the Greek language. It was unifying. It was the spoken language of this world in this area, and not just Greek. See, there were really 2 types of Greek. There was classical Greek, which is what Homer wrote in when he wrote his Iliad, Odyssey, and all that. But then there was just regular Koine Greek, which is the Greek of the common person. And that's what the Bible was written in, for the common person. Isn't that good? Another thing was the scattering of the Jews. What this did, the Jews set up synagogues everywhere they went. Well, that gave the Christians a place to go and preach. So there were synagogues all over the world, all over the Persian area, because of the Jews. The Pax Maronah. This is called the Peace of Rome. See, Rome, for a period of about 300 years, things were peaceful. And people could travel fairly safe. You know, you had to watch out for bad guys. But it was a fairly safe place. And they built these great roads. And I wish they had built Grants Mill Road. But there are Roman roads used today. They're a little rough probably to drive down, but I think they're mostly for walking on. But they're still there. I mean, those roads were built well. So you had the peace of Rome. There was freedom of travel, a great road system. What a great time to spread the gospel. There was also a discontent with many over the moral and religious climate. See, the gods were nothing but glorified humans. Sinful, glorified humans. And it just didn't fit well. The people were tired of them. And all of a sudden, this Christianity comes on the scene. And see, another good thing about it was that Christianity was for all. It didn't matter if you were slave free, men, women, Jew, Gentile, rich or poor. Christianity was for everybody. And that hadn't been the case until now. Another thing, the right parents. See, you had just the right parents who would have the Messiah, raise the Messiah, and the last one was, God was lucky here. He was lucky that this guy named Augustus had this decree that people had to go to their hometown and register every 14 years. See, that's what got Joseph to Bethlehem. The prophecy was that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And it was this decree of Augustus. I was joking about God being lucky, but they had to go to the town of their tribe, where Joseph was from the tribe of Judah, which was the tribe of David. And so he had to make an 80-mile trip from Nazareth. And I don't know if he had a donkey or not. You know, it always shows a donkey, but nothing in the scriptures about it. But
since Mary went, it would have been hard for her to walk that.
Yeah, well,
she needed a donkey.
It looked good on Christmas cards, anyhow. So the time is perfect for this to happen. Now, here's where we started on our journey. We started with Seth, and all these people are related. Went through David, went through Solomon, Rehoboam, and we end up with Jesus as our last person on our slide. Now, so our golden string has led us to a manger in Bethlehem, to a hill that looks like a skull called Golgotha, which the Latin word is Calvary. And then it ends up, we're going to wind our string to this empty tomb that takes place in Jerusalem. And that's where we come to. Now, here's where we started back in Genesis with this verse. It says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." And what happens is Jesus bruises the head of Satan on the cross and from the empty tomb. Watch this. There he is. He just stomped him. And so we end. I ended earlier than I thought I would. I told Carol, I said, kind of rush it up here where I can have a little more time. But we can have some discussion. I'm going to end with this quote from Augustine. More intellectual people than me call him Augustine. But have you ever heard anybody say, "I'm going over to Florida to St. Augustine"? I rest my case. So here it is. Here's a quote from Augustine, or however you want to say it. And it's so true. It said the new is in the old concealed, the old is in the new revealed. And that is so true. And I hope through this study that we have kind of revealed what has been concealed. And I hope it's been rich. Now, to just tell you where we're going, next week we do not meet. If you come in here next week, you're going to be very lonely. But you might be with your favorite person. The church is taking this summer break, but we only take the weekend of July the 4th. That's been our habit in here. So we'll be meeting the week after next. And what I'm planning on doing, I'm wanting to do the Sermon on the Mount. Verse by verse, very thorough. I mean, you know, a sermon by Jesus, that's probably worth looking at. But the first Sunday we come back, several years ago, I sat down with I've got two big old thick systematic theology books, and I took all the words that have to do with salvation. There's lots of them, all the theological words. And so I figured out what they mean. And so I'm going to do a special lesson on salvation that's going to describe these words: reconciliation, adoption, glorification, sanctification, all those. There's quite a few of them. So I'm going to explain the technical issues behind salvation. And salvation is free, but it wasn't cheap. So, and then the next week we're going to start the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew. So that's kind of our roadmap. And this also will be the last video. Not that many people really watch it either. Maybe 10 or 12 at the most. And that's okay. Well, it's a lot of work. It takes up my whole Sunday afternoon. And so what I'm hoping is that folks will come back. And most folks have. And I'm happy to see you. But anyhow, we've got 15 minutes here for comments and questions.
Can you go back to the first thread? Go back about 3 slides, because I missed it. I want to take a picture of it.
I'm going to make those for you on one page if I can.
Oh, good. That'd be wonderful.
Eventually.
Thank you.
You know, I think it's such a rich study. I mean, we've learned so much. And even this morning, I've heard of the Septuagint, and I knew it was the Greek, but that background of knowing that Alexander the Great started this wonderful library and that the scholars came on was very meaningful.
Yeah. History is very interesting.
It is.
A bunch of years ago when we were in M17, I did a series, I think it was a 5-parter on the history of the Christian church. If y'all ever want to do that, let me know. But it's pretty interesting to study. I love history anyhow. And that was one of my better subjects in high school. That and play. And lunch. I was great at lunch. Hey, Roy.
What was the purpose of Alexander? What did he go and try to do, people?
Conquer the world.
I know, but
And-
did he
and
take
he-
a Jewish religion or what?
No, he wanted to make the whole world Greek.
Yeah.
And he spread the Greek culture all the way to India, from Macedonia in Greece, all the way to India. Conquering on the way. He was hard to beat. He died at a young age. I think he drank too much or something. I forgot what killed him.
He died at the age of 33.
Yeah. And you've heard of the Gordian knot. Have you ever heard of that? there's something called a Gordian knot that people talk about. I'm shooting from the hip here. So if I remember correctly, the Gordian knot, somebody tied an oxen or something and said whoever could untie this knot would become the ruler of the world, so to speak. Well, nobody could untie it. And then Alexander came and he just took a sword and cut it. I've heard that story. I don't know if that's a true story or not, but he was an interesting guy to study. But he was impressed with the Greek. The Jews.
And you said Aristotle, he studied under him?
Aristotle was his mentor.
What do you think the influence of Aristotle was on him?
Well, Aristotle was big on philosophy. Aristotle was also, he talked a lot about nature. And see, something happened. I'll get to you in a minute. I got to tell them this.
Okay.
The writings of Aristotle got kind of lost to the West for a while. You know who had them? Islam. Islam had the writings of Aristotle. The West kind of lost them during those what's called the Dark Ages, Middle Ages. And in the 1200s, I think it is, 11 or 1200s, the West, Spain, which had become Muslim under Islam, was conquered. And guess what they discovered? The writings of Aristotle. But it gave the church a conundrum here, because people were more interested in the writings of Aristotle than they were in the Bible. As a matter of fact, you've heard of Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, they call him. See, he had to try to separate out Aristotle from faith. And so there became a division where Aristotle represented science, and then the Bible represented faith. But then that division got wider and wider, and the philosophers widened that thing, even to the point where science was to them more important than faith. As a matter of fact, before this time, they said that, let's see if I get this right, theology was the queen of the sciences, and science was its handmaiden. No, philosophy was its handmaiden. That reversed. And philosophy became the queen of the sciences, and theology became its handmaiden in the Middle Ages. There's a lot of, you have to read it. Okay, Roy?
You know, you're talking about those Roman roads that were built?
Yeah.
Today, the American Railroad track is the same width as a chariot.
Oh, is that right?
Back then.
Well, that was convenient. All right, anything else? Anybody have any good history that you know? Remember this, the mistakes we make is a history we haven't learned. That's what somebody said, and I think that's true. We keep making the same stupid mistakes over and over again because we haven't learned history. Well, I see by the old clock on the wall, it's a little early, but y'all don't mind that, do you?